Hello everyone and welcome to another video on African Tech Gurus. This is your #1 channel where we learn technology by doing. If you are new to this channel, thank you so much and you're very welcome. Please do us a big favor and subscribe to our channel so that each and every single time we do post a video, you are notified. If you are a returning subscriber and a returning viewer, we thank you so much for clicking on our videos. It really helps us and motivates us to do more of this and to serve you better. Please, if you have also not shared this video with someone who is learning tech, please do so that we all become a community of African tech gurus. So in today's video, we're still going to cover shell navigation, another concept. Previously, we have done shell navigation concept and we have done navigation and we have done looking around. Today, we are covering how to manipulate the different files that we will be having in our shell system. So if we jump into it, the lesson today is supposed to cover the following commands: cp, mv, rm, and mkdir. So these are some of the few commands that you can use to manipulate our files. So cp generally helps us copy the files and the directories that we have from one directory to another. mv helps us move or rename the files and the directories. And rm will help us delete the specific files and the specific directories that we do have. And lastly, we have mkdir, which helps us create the different directories. So these are some of the most frequently used commands on top of the ls, and these are some of the basic commands that we can use to manipulate and work on our files and directories. So one of the questions that we can even ask ourselves is, now, isn't all this easier with a file manager such as the ones that we have on Windows? Because there you can easily add, delete, drag, cut and paste and edit the files very easily using the file system that is present on Windows. So why are we going through all this headache and learning how to use old command line languages and programs? So the answer is very simple. It is the flexibility and the power that we do have, which is not available with most graphical file managers that are there on Windows and other operating systems. So it is very easy to manipulate using graphical file managers, but for complicated tasks and some that are a bit more complex, which is mainly what we'll be covering, it is very powerful and very easy to have this flexibility using our Linux commands in our Linux systems. So we can easily copy files, directories, and work around them if we have very complicated and very complex situations that we need to work around with. So for example, if we had to copy all the HTML files that we have from one directory to another, but only copy the files that do not exist in the destination directory, or were newer versions in that destination directory. If we were to do that using a file manager in a system such as Windows, it will be pretty hard. But if we were to use a command line, it is very simple, because all you need to do is copy cp-u and an asterisk, which is a wildcard, and we will get to that later, and .html, which is the extension of the files that we are looking at, because here we only want to copy all HTML files. And we will simply write the name of our destination. So it is as easy as that when we use the command line commands instead of using the graphical file managers that we have on most of our operating systems. So there's a concept that has been introduced here, wildcards, and before we begin with the commands that we are supposed to be covering today, we need to look at this feature. So since shell uses file names so much, it also provides special characters that will help us quickly specify the groups of files that we want. So these specific special characters that we are actually mentioning, they are called wildcards. And all they do is they allow us and help us to select file names based on a specific combination and patterns of characters. And if we look below, we have a table that helps us see the list of the different wildcards that we can use and what they mean. So for the very first one, which we have looked in the above example, is the asterisk. So what this does is it helps us match any combination of characters, but only the one that we have specified. So for example, in our above, we have specified .html. So what this will do is it will actually go and check through all the files and the directories and give us back the ones that actually end with .html. So the other one is the question mark, and it will only match any single character. So hope that is clear. It will just give us back matches of a single character. The other one that we can use is a combination of characters. So for example, if we want alphanumeric characters, we can use alnum. If we want digits which are numerals, we use the command or the wildcard digit. If you want just lowercase alphabetical characters, we can use this specific wildcard. So this is very helpful because it gives us a lot of flexibility to specifically choose and pick what file or directories that we do want. And if we also don't want a specific group or a specific type, we can use the exclamation mark, which will represent not, and here it will give us the character that is not a member of the ones that we have actually set. So here we can set to, we don't want alphanumeric characters, we don't want any alphabetic characters, we don't want any file or any file that is a digit, and so on and so forth. So using wildcards, it is very possible to construct a very sophisticated or a very complex selection criteria for file names. So one of the few examples that we have is we can use the asterisk to represent all files, and if we wanted to get the list or display all the files that actually start with a specific character, we just use G, and that will give us all the files that actually start with the character G. The other thing is, if we want to get all the file names that begin with character B and end with .text, which this can be pretty difficult to do with a graphical file manager, but with Linux it is very easy because now it is very flexible and it can help us get very complex workarounds and sophisticated criteria that we have to select different files. So here we want to select all files that will begin with character B and they have a .text extension. So that is very, very simple to do with a Linux command line. The other thing is, if you want any file that begins with the character data and followed by exactly 3 extra characters. So this can be very helpful if you don't remember the exact name of your file. Here you can easily use the exclamation mark, which helps us match any single character. So here we have a file, we're looking for a file called data, and after that it needs to be followed by exactly 3 more characters. So maybe you had written your file as data.org, so here it will be one of the examples or one of the display contents that will be actually shown to you as the user, and so on and so forth. So make sure you go through this document and internalize everything because it is very useful, and there are very many ways in which we can use the different combinations. So I want us to look at this last one. So here we have, this last one. So we have asterisk and we have a specific criteria that we want to look at. So here we are looking for all file names, and here we have used the exclamation mark, which in this case is standing for not, and here we have lower. So with this we are able to see that we are looking for any file name that does not end with a lowercase. I hope you got that one right. And this is slightly different from this other one over here, which helps us pick a selection of any file that begins with an uppercase, and this is an example of how we can use the command that we had actually seen here above, where we can match any character that is a member of a set characters, or here match any character that is not a member of the set characters. So now I want us to move to CP program, and CP, it will help us copy file names, files and directories. It is in its simplest form, it just helps us copy a single file, just one single file, but it can also be used to copy multiple files or multiple directories to a different directory. So now I want us to look at the CP program, and what it does, it helps us copy files and directories, and in its simplest form you can just use it to copy one file or one directory, but you can also use it to copy multiple files or multiple directories. And one thing that we can see in this example is we have the three dots, and what this means is it signifies that an item can be repeated one or more times. So you might be seeing this more oftenly. So what that means is this can be repeated more than once in your command. So let us look at a few examples of how we can use the CP. So in this example, we have CP file 1 and file 2. And what this does is it just copies what is in file 1 into file 2. And if file 2 does not exist, it will go ahead and create file 2. Also note that if file 2 is present, file 2 is silently overwritten with the contents of file 1. So before you actually use this command, it is advisable to actually view what you have in both files. And most importantly, what you have in the file that will now be overwritten. And a very interactive way of doing that is using the next command, which is cp-i and the file 1 and file 2 name. And what happens here is the user will be prompted, or the program will just give you an alert that you're about to overwrite what is in file 2 with what is in file 1. The next command is cp file 1 dir1. So what this does is it copies the contents of file 1 into a file name called file 1 inside directory dir1. I hope you got that one. It will copy the contents of file 1 inside the directory dir1. Next, we have cp-R dir1 and dir2. So what this does is it will copy the contents of directory 1, and if directory 2 does not exist, it will create it, and if it does exist, it creates a directory named dir1 within directory dir2. I hope you got that one. This is a bit more complex, but you can go ahead and create directory 1 and directory 2 if you really want to go ahead and actually see what is happening. The other command which is very common is the mv command, and what it does is it moves or renames the files and directories depending on how it's used. So it will either move one or move many files to a different directory. I hope you got that one. So how are some of the ways in which you can use it? You can use mv file 1 and file 2, and similar to cp, if file 2 does not exist, file 1 is renamed to file 2. So it will just rename file 1 to file 2. But if file 2 exists, in this case file 2 exists, its contents are silently replaced with the contents of file 1. So here it is also important to check what is contained in file 2 if it exists. And one of the very useful ways in which you can do that is using this command, mv-i file 1 and file 2. And in this case, we're using file 1 and file 2 to represent the names of the files that you are working with. So here, it is an interactive option, and if file 2 exists, then the user is prompted by the program before it actually overwrites file 2 with whatever is contained in file 1. The next one that I want us to look at is mv file 1 file 2 dir1. So what happens here is file 1 and file 2, which are the names of your files, the way you have named them, they will be moved to the directory called dir1. And in this case, if that directory dir1 will not exist, mv will exit with an error, which is very different from cp. what we saw in CP is CP file 1, dir1. What it will do is it will copy the contents of file 1 into a similar file which is also named file 1, but in this case it is inside dir1. I hope you got that one. So in this case, that is slightly different. So make sure you know the difference between the two. The other one is move dir1 and dir2. So here, if dir2 does not exist, then what will happen is dir1, which is the first directory, will just be renamed to dir2. But if you have dir2, then the directory dir1 is moved into that directory called dir2. So here as well, dir1 and dir2 are the different names in which you have named your specific directories in your file system. The other command that we need to look at is how to delete files, and we use the rm command. And it also has a recursive option, which is the -r. Please make sure you see this -r. And this also helps us to delete directories. So remember, a directory can contain other directories inside it or files inside it. So the -r just helps us to do that, and it will just help us remove whatever is in that content, and we will see it. So some of the ways in which we can use the rm command is we can use it to delete multiple files or one file, and here we're using it to delete two files called file 1 and file 2. The other one is we have this rm-i, and here -i we have seen is the interactive option, and what happens is before we delete or remove these files, we are prompted as users, and this is very useful. Instead of using the plain one without the interactive option, this is a better one because you will be able to have an intermediary step before you delete, because Linux does not have an undelete command. So please make sure that if you are very sure that you want to delete a file, go ahead, but if not, please be cautious and be wary, because it can have very terrific damages on your system if you use it anyhow, without any thought behind it, and specifically without using wildcards with it. So please make sure that you use rm very carefully, especially if you use wildcards, because wildcards are able to help us do much more. So please make sure you are very careful if you're going to use the rm command. The last one, which I had covered a few minutes back, is the rm-r, dir1 and dir2, and we use the -r, which is a recursive option, to help us delete and remove directories, because directories contain other subdirectories and other contents within it. The other very useful command that we can use is the mkdir command, and what it helps us do is it just helps us create the directories. It is a very simple one, but we'll use it a lot, and it has various uses in which you can use it. You can use it anytime, at any stage. It doesn't matter whichever directory you are currently at, but you can use it there. So we can now look at how we can use the different wildcards with the different commands, because we have seen that wildcards helps us do a number of things. So in this case, we have 3 examples. I will cover the first one, and in this one we have the cp command and the asterisk wildcard and the .text and text files. So here what is happening is it is going to copy all the files of the working directory with the names ending with the characters .tx. So how do we get to know that? Is because we have used the asterisk, this asterisk, which helps us pick all the files. If you can go back and see, what it does is it picks all file names. So that is simply how we can combine wildcards with the cp command, and we can also use it with other commands as well. And once it does that, it will move it to an existing directory called text files. text files, because what you're doing is we are copying all these files with a .tx, and we can't copy them into other files now, because files are contained within a folder or a directory in this case. So it will move all the files that have or end with the .tx extension into an existing directory. Remember, this directory has already been created, it is already there, so it will move all these files into that directory. The other one that we need to look at is the move command and how we can use the wildcard, and in this case the all file name wildcard. And what is happening here is we want to move the subdirectory called dir1 and all the files that end with the .back extension in the current working directory's parent directory to an existing directory called dir2. So this is a bit complex, but what I want us to see is this bit over here. Remember, we mentioned the dots. Two dots represent the parent directory of the current directory. That's all it means. So the first thing we want to do is, in our current directory, what is the parent directory? And if the parent directory has any other file in it that has the extension .bak, then what we need to do is we need to move those files and together with this directory dir1. So those are the two things that we are picking. We are picking the subdirectory dir1, and in that subdirectory it has a parent directory, and in that parent directory we want to have all the files that have the .back extension, and pick all this and move it to an existing directory. Remember, it needs to exist into a directory called dir2. I hope you got that one. The last one, which has a special symbol, which is that I have highlighted in blue, is it helps us delete all files in the current working directory that end with the character, that special character. It's called a tilde. And some application will create backup files using the naming scheme. And using this command, it will clean out a directory. So as we have mentioned, please use the rm command, very useful, because it does not have an undelete button. And they had given us a caveat and said that before we use the rm with wildcards, we need to know that it is a helpful trick and it can help us construct other commands, and in this case you can use the ls instead. So please use the rm very carefully. And with that, it marks the end of our content review for the shell navigation. We have covered Linux navigation, looking around and manipulating files, and I will link these videos above, and you can also get them in the playlist. If you liked today's video, please give it a thumbs up. It helps us provide better services to you and to others. Also share it with a friend and a colleague so that we all become better African tech gurus. Thank you for watching today's video, and until next time, happy coding.